3 days after I buried my wife, Catherine, my son handed me a check for $10,000 and told me my life's work was gone. He looked me in the eye and said, "The family business has been sold, Dad. Your share is 10 grand. But I knew the company was worth 13 million. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just laughed, a cold, dry laugh that made him step back. I asked him one simple question. Who is the buyer? When he answered, he didn't realize the trap had already snapped shut. He had just sold my own empire back to me. But before we get to that moment of sweet justice, let me take you back to where the nightmare began. If you have ever been betrayed by the very people you sacrificed everything for, hit that like button and subscribe. Let me know in the comments which city you are listening from. Because what happened at that funeral was not just cruelty. It was a declaration of war. The Chicago wind in November cuts right through your bones, especially when you are standing over a fresh grave. The earth was still loose over Catherine's casket. The scent of lilies was thick in the air. Lilies were her favorite. I had ordered $5,000 worth of white lilies to blanket her final resting place, because she deserved a queen's farewell. I was 70 years old, standing there in my black wool coat, feeling like half of my soul had been ripped away. My hands were trembling, not from the cold, but from a grief so heavy it felt like I was carrying the headstone on my back. And then I heard it, the sound that shattered my moment of silence, a loud, exaggerated sigh. I turned my head slightly. Standing just a few feet away were my son Preston and his wife Tiffany. They weren't crying. Their eyes were dry. Tiffany was checking her phone, scrolling through something with a bored expression. She nudged Preston and whispered loud enough for me to hear. "Can we go yet?" My heels are sinking into the mud. And honestly, Preston, 5,000 for flowers? That is obscene. She is dead. She cannot even see them. Think of what we could have done with that money. That is a weekend in the Hamptons. My blood ran cold. Hotter than the grief, hotter than the tears freezing on my cheeks, was a sudden surge of rage. I tightened my grip on my cane. Catherine had treated Tiffany like a daughter. When Tiffany wanted to start her boutique, Catherine wrote the check. When Tiffany needed a shoulder to cry on because Preston was working late, Catherine was there. And this was the thanks she got? Preston didn't scold her. He didn't tell her to show some respect. He just adjusted his tie, looking uncomfortable. He walked over to me. I thought for a second, just a second, that he was coming to hug me. I thought he was going to say, "Dad, I got you. We will get through this." I am Harrison Caldwell. I built a logistics empire from a single rusty truck. I have faced union strikes, recessions, and hostile takeovers. But nothing prepared me for what my own flesh and blood did next. Preston reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a thick manila envelope. He didn't look me in the eye. He looked at a point somewhere over my left shoulder. "Dad," he said, his voice flat, "we need to talk about living arrangements." I stared at the envelope. "Here, now, at your mother's funeral." Preston shrugged. "There is never a good time, Dad. But business is business. Since Mom is gone, staying in the main house doesn't make sense anymore. It is too big for one person. The heating bills alone are wasteful." I took the envelope. My fingers felt numb. I tore it open. It wasn't a sympathy card. It wasn't a letter of comfort. It was a legal document. At the top, in bold black letters, were the words, "Notice to vacate." I looked up at him. The shock was so physical, it felt like I had been punched in the gut. "What is this, Preston?" It is an eviction notice. Dad Preston said, stepping back as if he expected me to swing at him. Technically, the house belongs to Caldwell Logistics. The LLC owns the deed. And as the current CEO, acting in the best interest of the company assets, I have decided to liquidate the property. Liquidate. He used that word like he was talking about an old warehouse, not the home where he grew up. I took a step toward him. My voice was low, dangerous. I built that house, Preston. I laid the brick patio with my own hands, 40 years ago. I planted the oak tree in the backyard the day you were born. That is my home. That is where your mother's scent is still on the pillowcases. Preston shook his head, a smirk touching the corner of his lips. Actually, Dad, you don't own it. Remember 5 years ago? You transferred the deed to the company. For tax purposes. You signed the papers yourself. I remembered. God help me, I remembered. 5 years ago, I had stepped down to care for Catherine when she got sick. Preston had brought in his fancy lawyers. He told me Dad lets move the assets to the LLC to protect them from inheritance tax. It is just a formality. You will always be the owner in spirit. I trusted him. He was my son. I signed everything. I handed him the keys to the kingdom because I thought he was guarding the castle. I didn't know I was handing the keys to a thief. You tricked me, I whispered. You used my trust to steal my house. It is not stealing, Dad. It is asset management, Tiffany chimed in, stepping up beside him. She linked her arm through his, looking at me with pure disdain. Look, Harrison, let's be real. You are 70. You are slipping. We have seen you forget where you put your keys. It starts there, and then what? You leave the stove on and burn the place down? We are doing this for your own safety. My safety? I looked at her. The woman who was wearing a diamond necklace I paid for. You want the house? I said, my voice trembling with suppressed fury. We don't want the house, Tiffany laughed, a cruel, sharp sound. We are selling it. The market is hot right now. We have already listed it. But honestly, Harrison, the layout is dated. Before we show it to buyers, we need to gut that dusty old office of yours. The one with all those old ship models and books. I am going to turn it into a yoga studio for the staging photos. It will add value. My office. My sanctuary. The place where I built the company. Where I sat up late nights worrying about payroll so Preston could have private school tuition. She wanted to turn it into a yoga studio? You have 48 hours, Dad, Preston said, checking his watch again. The movers are coming on Wednesday. We have booked a room for you at Sunny Meadows. It is a nice facility. They have bingo on Tuesdays. Sunny Meadows. The place everyone in Chicago knew was a warehouse for the dying. A place that smelled of bleach and despair. I looked at my son. The boy I taught to ride a bike. The man I groomed to take over. I looked for a trace of guilt, a trace of hesitation. There was none. Just greed and a weakness so profound it made me sick. He was being manipulated by Tiffany, yes, but he was a willing participant. He wanted the money. He wanted the house sold so he could cash out. I straightened my back. I stood to my full height. I might be 70. I might be grieving. But I was still Harrison Caldwell. And they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They thought I was a feeble old man who would go quietly into the night. They thought they could bury me alongside Catherine. I folded the eviction notice and put it in my pocket. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. You want me out in 48 hours? I asked. Yes, Dad. Preston said, relieved, thinking I was surrendering. And leave the keys on the counter. Don't take anything valuable. The furniture is company property, too. I looked at Catherine's grave one last time. I promised her I would take care of the family. But sometimes, taking care of the family means cutting out the rot. I nodded slowly. I will be ready, Preston. Do not worry. I turned and walked away from them through the muddy grass. I didn't look back. I didn't go home to pack. I walked straight to the main road and hailed a cab. I wasn't going to Sunny Meadows. I was going to war. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. But they forgot one thing. I wrote the rule book they were trying to use against me. And in 48 hours, they were going to learn that the old man still had teeth. The morning sun hit the mahogany dining table where I had eaten breakfast for 40 years. But today there were no pancakes and no coffee. There were only stacks of paper and 3 strangers in expensive gray suits sitting like vultures waiting for a carcass. Preston sat at the head of the table. My seat. He didn't even look up when I walked into the room, still wearing the same clothes I had worn to the funeral, because I hadn't slept a wink. The air in the room was thick with tension and the smell of stale cologne. "Sit down, Dad," Preston said without emotion. "We do not have much time. The auditors are breathing down my neck, and we need to resolve this crisis before the market opens on Monday." I pulled out my chair slowly. My joints ached from the cold and the stress, but I kept my face blank. Tiffany was standing by the window, tapping her long fingernails against the glass. She turned to look at me and rolled her eyes, as if my very presence was an inconvenience to her morning schedule. Preston slid a heavy binder across the polished wood. It hit the center of the table with a heavy thud that sounded like a gavel. The cover was clear plastic, but the summary page was visible. It was a sea of red ink. "Read it," Preston commanded. "Or let me save you the trouble, since reading small print seems to be hard for you these days. Caldwell Logistics is bleeding. We are hemorrhaging cash, Dad. The quarterly report shows a net loss of $40 million. We are insolvent." I looked at him. $40 million. It was an impossible number. When I stepped down 5 years ago, the company had a reserve of $20 million and 0 debt. We owned our fleet outright. We owned our warehouses. I opened the binder. My hands were steady now. I wasn't looking at this as a father anymore. I was looking at it as the man who built the business from the ground up. I skipped the executive summary, which I knew Preston had written to manipulate me, and went straight to the operational expense ledger. My eyes scanned the columns. I have spent 45 years in the trucking industry. I can look at a manifest and tell you if a driver took a detour just by the mileage and fuel consumption. I know the price of tires, brake pads, and diesel fuel better than I know the names of my neighbors. And there it was, the lie. It was staring me right in the face in black and white. Fuel costs were up 300% from last year. I paused. I looked closer. 300%. In a year where global oil prices had stabilized and our fleet had been upgraded to hybrid engines 3 years ago specifically to cut costs. There was no physical way our trucks burned that much fuel, unless they were driving to the moon and back. I looked at the maintenance column. Replacement parts were listed at 4 times the market rate. I looked at the payroll. Consultant fees had ballooned to $5 million. This was not a business failing. This was a business being looted. Someone was siphoning money out of the company through inflated invoices and fake vendors. And that someone was sitting at the head of the table, looking at me with a mix of arrogance and pity. Preston saw me lingering on the page. He reached out and tapped the paper impatiently. "Don't bother analyzing it, Dad," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "The market shifted. The new regulations killed us. You wouldn't understand. The industry has changed since you were in charge. Old school methods don't work anymore. We tried to save it, but the debt is too heavy. The banks are calling in the loans." He was lying through his teeth, but I didn't say a word. I didn't point out the impossible fuel costs. I didn't ask who these expensive consultants were. If I challenged him now, he would just claim I was confused or paranoid. He would use my anger as proof of my incompetence. I closed the binder slowly. "So what is the plan?" I asked quietly. Preston exchanged a look with the lawyers. He leaned forward, clasping his hands on the table. "There is only one way out. Bankruptcy is messy. It would destroy our name, and they would seize everything, including your personal assets. But I found a lifeline. A miracle, really." He pulled another document from his briefcase. This one was thinner. "There is a private equity firm called Nexus Capital. They specialize in distressed assets. I have been in talks with them for weeks, trying to save what I could. They are willing to buy Caldwell Logistics. They will assume the $40 million debt and take the company off our hands." "And the price I asked." Preston sighed, as if he was delivering tragic news. "Because of the debt, the equity is basically zero, Dad. They are buying the company for $1 plus the assumption of debt." $1. My life's work. "However," Preston added quickly, seeing the look on my face, "because I negotiated hard, they agreed to a goodwill payout for the founding shares." He slid a check across the table. It was the same amount he had mentioned at the funeral, $10,000. "This is it, Dad. This is all that is left of your empire. 10 grand. If we do not sign this deal by noon today, the bank forecloses and we get nothing. Absolutely nothing. You will be destitute." Tiffany walked over and stood behind him, resting her hands on his shoulders. "You should be thanking him, Harrison," she said sharply. "Preston has been up for 3 nights trying to fix your mess. If he hadn't found this buyer, you would be on the street with zero. At least with this, you can pay for a few months at the nursing home." I looked at the check. Then I looked at the contract. It was a total acquisition agreement. But the last page was the most important. It was a waiver of voting rights and a power of attorney transfer. "Sign here," Preston said, handing me a gold pen. "This gives me the authority to finalize the sale on behalf of the family trust. Once you sign this, you are free. No more stress, no more debt. You can just go rest." I held the pen. The weight of it felt familiar. I looked at the fuel cost line one last time in my mind. 300%. That money didn't vanish into thin air. It went somewhere, and I was going to find out where. But to catch a thief, you have to let him think he has gotten away with the crime. If I refused to sign, they would just declare me mentally unfit and do it anyway. That would take weeks, and I would be watched. But if I signed, if I played the defeated old man, they would stop watching me. They would get careless. I looked up at Preston. His eyes were wide with greed. He wasn't worried about the company. He was worried I wouldn't sign. "You really think this is the only way?" I asked, my voice sounding frail and tired. "It is the only way, Dad," Preston said softly. "Trust me." I uncapped the pen. I let my hand shake a little as I brought the tip to the paper. I saw Tiffany smirk. She was already mentally spending the money she thought this deal would hide. I signed my name, Harrison Caldwell. Preston snatched the paper away the second the ink touched the page. He didn't even wait for it to dry. The relief on his face was instant. He handed the document to the lawyer, who immediately put it in a briefcase and clicked the lock shut. "Done," Preston said, standing up. He didn't say thank you. He didn't say, "I am sorry." He just looked at his watch. Tiffany clapped her hands together. "Finally! Now we can move on. Harrison, the driver, is outside. He will take you to the motel we booked for you until the nursing home room is ready on Tuesday. We need the house empty by tonight for the cleaning crew." I stood up. I didn't take the check. I left the $10,000 sitting on the mahogany table. "I don't need your money," I said quietly. Preston laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You will, Dad. You really will. But suit yourself." I walked out of the dining room. I walked past the photos of my wife on the mantel. I walked out the front door into the biting Chicago wind. I had nothing but the clothes on my back and a wallet with $50. But as I walked down the driveway, I wasn't thinking about where I would sleep. I was thinking about that fuel report. Preston thought he had just buried me. He thought he had signed my retirement papers. He was wrong. He had just signed his own confession. And I knew exactly who to bring it to. I pulled my collar up against the cold and started walking toward the train station. The game had just begun. I walked out of the house with my head held high, but my stomach was churning with a nausea that had nothing to do with hunger. The wind on the street was brutal, and it carried the first stinging flakes of a snowstorm that the weatherman had warned us about all week. I pulled my coat tighter around myself. I needed to think. I needed a plan. But first, I needed water. My throat was parched from the argument, and my hands were shaking from the adrenaline crash. I walked 3 blocks to the corner market, a small place called Tony's Deli, where I had bought my morning paper for 20 years. I walked in, and the warmth of the heater hit me like a physical blow. I went to the cooler and grabbed a bottle of water and a sandwich. I did not want to spend much, but I knew I needed sugar and hydration if I was going to fight this war. I walked to the counter. The girl behind the register was new, young, and chewing gum loudly. I placed the items down and pulled out my black titanium credit card. The one with the limitless limit. The one that had paid for Preston's college tuition and Tiffany's wedding dress. I tapped the card on the reader. A sharp beep echoed through the small store. Declined. I frowned. That was impossible. I wiped the chip on my sleeve, thinking it was just a glitch, and inserted it into the machine. Processing. Processing. Declined. Please contact your financial institution, the screen flashed in bright, angry red letters. Try this one, I said, pulling out my debit card from my personal checking account. This was my private money, money that had nothing to do with the company. I swiped it. Declined. Card reported lost or stolen. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. Face ID recognized me, but the screen that popped up was not my balance. It was a notification box. User access revoked. Please contact the primary account administrator. Administrator? Since when was there an administrator on my own bank account? And then I saw the email notification at the top of my screen. It was an automated alert from the court system. Order of temporary guardianship granted. Petitioner Preston Caldwell. Reason? Incapacity due to advanced dementia. I stood there in the middle of the deli and felt the floor tilt beneath my feet. He had done it. He had actually done it. While I was grieving my wife, while I was planning her funeral, Preston had gone to a judge with those fake medical records he must have forged and declared me incompetent. He had not just stolen my company, he had stolen my legal identity. I was no longer Harrison Caldwell, the businessman. I was Harrison Caldwell, the ward of the state, and my son was my keeper. "Sir, are you going to pay for that?" the girl asked, snapping her gum. I looked at her. I looked at the sandwich I could not buy. I reached into my pocket and felt the single $50 bill I had left. My entire net worth was now $50. I paid for the water and the sandwich with cash. My hands were trembling so hard I almost dropped the change. I stepped back out into the cold. The snow was falling harder now, sticking to the pavement. I had to get back to the house. Not to sleep, but to get into my wall safe. I kept an emergency stash there, along with my passport and the original deed to the property. If I could get those, I had a chance. I walked as fast as my old legs would carry me. The wind bit at my exposed face. By the time I reached the driveway of my estate, I was gasping for air. The house loomed in front of me, dark and imposing. The lights were off downstairs, but the master bedroom, my bedroom, was blazing with light. I walked up the stone path I had laid with my own hands. I reached for the front door handle and slid my key into the lock. It stopped halfway. I pushed harder. It would not turn. I jiggled it, thinking maybe the cold had frozen the mechanism. But then I looked closely at the hardware. The brass was shiny. Too shiny. It was brand new. They had changed the locks. In the hour I had been gone, they had called a locksmith and sealed me out of my own life. I pounded on the door. "Preston, open this door. This is my house." Silence. The only sound was the wind howling through the old oak trees. I stepped back and looked up at the second floor. The curtains in the master bedroom parted. Tiffany was standing there. She was holding a glass of red wine. My wine. A vintage I had been saving for my 50th wedding anniversary. She looked down at me, shivering in the snow, and she did not look away. She took a slow sip of the wine, and then she smiled. It was a small, cruel smile that said everything. "You are nothing. You are nobody." She raised her hand and gave me a little wave. A wave you would give to a stranger passing by. Then she closed the curtains. I stood there staring at the closed window. The snow was gathering on my shoulders. I was locked out. No money, no ID, no home. That was when I heard the engine. A white van turned into the driveway. It had rust spots around the wheel wells, and the muffler was rattling loose. It was not a medical transport. It looked more like a dog catcher's truck. On the side, in peeling blue letters, were the words, "Sunny Meadows Assisted Living Facility." The van screeched to a halt right behind me, blocking my path to the street. The doors opened and two men stepped out. They were not wearing scrubs. They were wearing thick winter jackets, and they were big. They looked like bouncers from a cheap nightclub, not caregivers. One of them checked a clipboard while the other cracked his knuckles. "Harrison Caldwell?" the first one asked. His voice was gravelly and impatient. I took a step back. "I am Harrison. Who are you?" "We're your ride, Pops," the second one said, grinning to reveal a chipped tooth. "Your son called us. Said you were having an episode. Said you might be violent." I am not violent, I said, backing up until my back hit the cold wood of my front door. I am not going anywhere with you. Look, Pops, we can do this the easy way or the hard way, the first man said, tossing the clipboard into the van. The easy way is you get in the chair. The hard way involves a sedative and restraints. Your son signed the papers. You belong to us now. He took a step toward me, reaching for my arm. I looked at the van. I knew about Sunny Meadows. People went in there and they did not come out. They were sedated into silence, given the bare minimum of food, and left to rot in soiled sheets while the facility collected their Social Security checks. If I got into that van, I would be dead within a month. The man lunged for me. I did the only thing I could do. I threw the bottle of water at his face. It was a distraction, a pathetic attempt at defense, but it made him flinch. "You little rat," he growled, wiping the water from his eyes. "Grab him," the other one shouted. I turned and ran. I ran not toward the street where they could cut me off, but toward the side gate that led to the alley. I ran with 70 years of wear on my knees. I ran with the fear of a man who sees his own grave opening up. I could hear their heavy boots crunching in the snow behind me. I could hear them cursing. I burst through the side gate and stumbled into the alleyway. The snow was blinding now. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to run. I had $50 in my pocket and the clothes on my back. And I had a fury burning in my chest that was hotter than the cold. They thought they had caught me. They thought the game was over. But as I disappeared into the shadows of the city, leaving the two goons cursing in the snow, I made a vow. I would survive this night, and tomorrow I would make them wish they had killed me when they had the chance. I scrambled over a stack of damp cardboard boxes, my breath tearing at my throat like broken glass. I could hear the heavy boots of the orderlies slapping against the wet pavement behind me. They were younger, faster, and they were closing the distance. I knew I could not outrun them, not with 70-year-old knees and a heart that was already breaking from grief. The alley opened up onto State Street, which was busy with Friday night traffic and blinding neon lights. I burst out onto the sidewalk, startling a group of tourists, but I didn't keep running. I knew if I ran, they would tackle me and drag me into that van, and no one would stop them, because they had the paperwork. They had the law. I had to use the one weapon I had left, my age. I stopped abruptly near a lamppost and grabbed my chest. I let out a guttural cry of pain and crumpled to the icy concrete. I made sure to fall hard enough to look real, but controlled enough not to break a hip. I curled into a ball, gasping loudly, clutching my heart. "Help me!" I screamed, my voice cracking. "My heart! Please, call 911!" The two orderlies skid to a halt just a few feet away. They hesitated. This was not in their training manual. Kidnapping an old man was one thing, but dealing with a cardiac arrest on a public street with witnesses pulling out their phones was a liability they were not paid enough to handle. "Is he faking it?" the one with the chipped tooth asked, but he looked nervous. "I don't know, man. Look at him. He is turning gray," the other one hissed. I groaned louder, squeezing my eyes shut. "I am dying. Call the police." A woman in a red coat stopped and pointed. "Oh my God, that man is having a heart attack. Someone call an ambulance." That was the moment. The orderlies looked at the gathering crowd, then at each other. They panic. If the police came and saw the fake paperwork, or asked questions about why they were chasing a geriatric patient down an alley, they would be finished. "Let's go," the big one muttered. "Not worth it." They turned and sprinted back toward the alley, disappearing into the shadows. I stayed on the ground for another 10 seconds, counting my heartbeats. Then, as the kind woman in the red coat reached down to touch my shoulder, I did the unthinkable. I sprang up. I didn't wait to explain. I didn't wait to thank her. I bolted toward the subway entrance 10 yards away, leaving the crowd confused and staring at the miracle of the old man who cheated death. I threw myself through the turnstile, swiping my Metro card with trembling fingers, praying there was still a balance on it from years ago. The green light flashed. I pushed through and stumbled down the stairs into the underground, just as the rumble of an approaching train shook the platform. I squeezed into the car just as the doors hissed shut. I collapsed onto a plastic seat, my chest heaving for real this time. The train lurched forward, and I watched the station platform blur into darkness. I was safe for now. But as the adrenaline faded, the shame set in. I looked at my reflection in the dark window across the aisle. I saw a man in an expensive wool coat that was now stained with alley mud. I saw hair that was disheveled and eyes that were wild with fear. I looked like a fugitive. I looked like a criminal. 24 hours ago, I was Harrison Caldwell. I was a titan of industry. I had a driver who opened my door. I had people who scrambled to light my cigar. I commanded a fleet of 5,000 trucks that moved goods across this entire country. And now, here I was, huddling in a graffiti-covered subway car, smelling of urine and stale fast food, running from 2 minimum-wage thugs hired by my own son. The humiliation was a physical weight. I pulled my coat tighter, trying to hide my face from the other passengers. A teenager with headphones was staring at me. A tired nurse was looking at my muddy shoes. Did they know? Could they see that I was a man who had lost everything? I closed my eyes and forced myself to breathe. I could not break down now. If I cried, I would lose. I had to turn this shame into fuel. I had to turn this fear into a weapon. I thought about Preston sitting in my house drinking my wine, thinking he had won. He probably thought I was currently being strapped into a bed at Sunny Meadows. He was probably laughing. Let him laugh. The train ride felt like it lasted a lifetime. I changed lines twice just to be sure I wasn't being followed. I got off at the financial district station. It was nearly midnight. The streets were deserted canyons of steel and glass. The wind was howling off the lake, cutting through my clothes, but I marched forward. I stopped in front of a narrow brownstone building nestled between 2 skyscrapers. It was an old building, one that had refused to sell out to developers. On the brass plaque by the door, it read, Jameson and Associates. Jameson was my oldest friend. He was the only lawyer in Chicago I trusted because he was the only one who had never asked me for a favor. He was a workaholic, a man who lived in his office because he had nothing else. I prayed he was there tonight. I pressed the buzzer. The camera mounted above the door blinked red. "Who is it?" a voice crackled over the intercom. It was rough, tired. "Jameson, it is Harrison," I said, my voice raspy from the cold. "Open the door." There was a long silence. Then the buzzer buzzed, a long, harsh sound. I pushed the heavy oak door open and stumbled into the lobby. The heat of the building enveloped me, and I almost fell to my knees. The elevator ride to the 4th floor was a blur. When the doors opened, Jameson was standing there. He was wearing a cardigan and holding a glass of scotch. He looked at me, and his jaw dropped. "Harrison," he gasped, stepping forward. "My God, you look like you have been to hell." I walked past him into his office, limping slightly. I went straight to the leather armchair by his fireplace and collapsed into it. I didn't look at him. I looked at the fire. "I have been to hell, Jameson," I said quietly. "My son sent me there." Jameson closed the door and locked it. He poured a second glass of scotch and handed it to me. His hands were shaking slightly. He saw the mud on my coat. He saw the terror in my eyes that I couldn't hide. "Tell me," he said, sitting down opposite me. "Tell me everything." I took a sip of the scotch. It burned my throat in a good way. It woke me up. "Preston sold the company," I said. "He forged medical records to declare me incompetent. He kicked me out of the house. And tonight, he tried to have me committed to Sunny Meadows." Jameson turned pale. He set his glass down hard. "That son of a bitch." I looked at Jameson. The fire in the grate reflected in my eyes. "I am not here for sympathy, Jameson. I am here for revenge. I have $50 in my pocket, and I am a fugitive in my own city. But I know something they don't know." "What is that?" Jameson asked, leaning in. "I know how they are cooking the books," I said. "And I know you are the best forensic accountant in the state, masked as a lawyer. We are going to tear them apart, Jameson. But first, I need to sleep. Just for an hour." Jameson nodded. "You are safe here, Harrison. No one gets in here without a warrant." I closed my eyes. The image of the subway window faded. The image of the alley faded. All I could see was Preston's face. And for the first time in 3 days, I smiled. Because tomorrow, the hunter would become the prey. The coffee in the pot had turned into sludge hours ago, but neither of us cared. Jameson had taken off his cardigan and rolled up his sleeves, revealing the forearms of a man who used to box in college. He was not just a lawyer tonight. He was a forensic accountant, and he was dissecting the corpse of my company with the precision of a surgeon. We had projected the photos I took of the financial reports onto a large screen on the wall. The numbers glowed in the dim light of the office, casting long shadows across the room. For the first hour, we worked in silence. The only sound was the clicking of Jameson's keyboard and the scratching of his pen on a yellow legal pad. Then he stopped. He leaned back in his chair and took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Harrison, come look at this," he said. His voice was quiet. It was the voice of a man who had just found a murder weapon. I walked around the desk. On the screen, he had highlighted a series of vendor payments. "You noticed the fuel costs were high," Jameson said, pointing at the screen. "But look at where the money is going. It is not going to Shell or Exxon or any of our usual suppliers. It is going to a company called Redstone Energy." I frowned. I had never heard of Redstone Energy. In 40 years of logistics, I knew every major fuel supplier in the Midwest. "Exactly," Jameson said. "I just ran a background check on Redstone Energy. It was incorporated 6 months ago. The registered agent is a lawyer in the Cayman Islands. But look at the billing address." He pulled up a Google Maps image. It was a picture of a UPS store in a strip mall in a rundown part of Gary, Indiana. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. My son was paying millions of dollars to a mailbox. "And it is not just fuel," Jameson continued. He started clicking through tabs rapidly. "Look at this, Blue Horizon Consulting, $4 million for software upgrades. Apex Maintenance Solutions, $3 million for fleet repairs. All of them, every single one of them was created in the last 8 months. He turned the screen toward me. These are not real companies, Harrison. They are shell companies, ghost entities. Preston is not losing money. He is stealing it. He is taking cash out of Caldwell Logistics, paying these fake vendors. And I guarantee you, if we dug deep enough, we would find that he controls the bank accounts associated with them. I stared at the screen. It was a bust-out scheme. It was the oldest trick in the book. You take a healthy company, you bleed it dry by paying fake invoices to yourself, and then you declare the company insolvent. You claim the business failed because of market conditions while you sit on a pile of cash in an offshore account. He is gutting it, I whispered. He is gutting the animal while it is still alive. It gets worse, Jameson said. He opened a new window. Remember that savior he found? Nexus Capital? The Arab fund he told you about? I nodded. The buyer who was going to save us from bankruptcy. I pulled their corporate registry from Delaware, Jameson said. His face was grim. Nexus Capital is not an Arab fund. It is not a fund at all. It is a single-member LLC formed 60 days ago. It has 0 assets. It has no website, no history, no board of directors. Then who owns it? I asked, even though I was starting to suspect the answer. Jameson typed in a command to access the deeper registry files which he had access to as a licensed attorney. The screen refreshed. The registered owner is a holding company called P Squared Ventures. P Squared, I repeated. P for Preston, and P for phony, Jameson added. Harrison, do you understand what he is doing? He is not selling the company to a stranger. He is selling it to himself. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Preston had manufactured a crisis. He made the company look like it was failing so he could force me to sell my shares for pennies. He was using the shell companies to lower the value, and then using Nexus Capital to buy the assets debt-free. He was going to steal the entire empire right out from under me, and he was going to use my own money to do it. He sat at my dining room table, I said, my voice trembling with rage. He sat there and told me he was saving the family legacy. He told me I was old and confused, and all the while, he was the one holding the knife. Jameson stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. This is fraud, Harrison. It is embezzlement. It is elder abuse. It is racketeering. We have him. We have the paper trail. He turned back to me, his eyes shining with the thrill of the hunt. We can file an injunction tomorrow morning. We can freeze the sale. We can drag him into court and depose him. I can have forensic auditors tearing apart his life by Monday. We will get your house back. We will get the company back. It might take 2 years of litigation, but we will win. 2 years. I looked at the screen. I looked at the fake company names. I thought about Tiffany standing in the window sipping my wine. I thought about the way Preston looked at his watch at his mother's funeral. 2 years of hearings. 2 years of tabloids dragging our family name through the mud. 2 years of Preston playing the victim, claiming his father was senile. No, I said. Jameson blinked. What do you mean, no? Harrison, this is a slam-dunk legal case. I don't want a legal case, Jameson. I stood up and walked over to the fireplace. The fire had died down to embers, but there was still heat there. If we sue him, he will lawyer up. He will hide the money. He will drag this out until I am dead. And even if I win, the company will be destroyed by the scandal. I turned to face my friend. I don't want to sue him. I want to destroy him. Jameson looked at me, confused. Then how? You said Nexus Capital is for sale, right? It is a shell company buying distressed assets. Yes, Jameson nodded slowly. And Preston thinks he is the only one who knows the company is actually valuable. He thinks he is buying a dying horse that is actually a racehorse. Exactly. Then let's give him exactly what he wants, I said, a cold smile spreading across my face. He wants to sell Caldwell Logistics to Nexus Capital. Let him. But we are going to change who is sitting in the chair at Nexus. Jameson's eyes widened as he realized what I was suggesting. You want to buy Nexus? He whispered. I want to buy the buyer, I corrected. You said Nexus is a Delaware LLC. Ownership can be transferred privately. If Preston used a registered agent to set it up, he probably doesn't even check the back-end filings daily. He is too arrogant. He thinks he is the smartest man in the room. I walked back to the desk and placed my hand on the stack of papers. We use the money from the Phoenix Trust, my secret money. We contact the registered agent for Nexus. We make an offer to buy the shell entity itself. Since Preston is hiding his identity behind layers of corporate veils, he won't see it coming. We buy the shell company that is buying my logistics firm. Jameson started to smile. A slow, dangerous smile. So when Preston signs the sale contract, he will be signing it over to me, I finished. And because he cooked the books to make the company look worthless, he will be selling it for pennies. He is digging a grave for me, Jameson. I am just going to let him fall into it. Jameson sat back down at his computer. He cracked his knuckles. It is risky, Harrison. If he finds out, he won't, I said. Because he thinks I am a senile old man sleeping in a motel room. He thinks he has already won. That is his weakness. I checked my watch. It was 4 a.m. We have 48 hours before the closing dinner, I said. Can you do it? Can you buy Nexus Capital out from under him without him knowing? Jameson began typing furiously. For $25 million, Harrison, I can buy God himself. I will have the paperwork ready by sunrise. Good, I said. I sat back in the leather chair and closed my eyes. Jameson looked at me. You said you didn't want to wait 2 years. I opened my eyes. They were dry and hard as flint. No, I said. 2 years is for justice. I don't want justice. I want a massacre. I want to see the look on his face when he realizes he played himself. I want to ruin him in 2 weeks. And as the sun began to rise over the cold, gray city of Chicago, I knew that for the first time since Catherine died, I had a reason to live. I was going to teach my son one final lesson, and this one was going to cost him everything. Jameson looked at me with a mixture of admiration and concern from across his mahogany desk. The city lights outside had turned off one by one, leaving us in the pre-dawn grayness that felt heavy with anticipation. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking in the silence of the office. Harrison, he said softly, his voice raspy from the long night of work. I admire your fire. I truly do. But we need to be realistic about the mechanics of this. Buying a shell company, particularly one that is currently engaged in an active acquisition, is not like buying a gallon of milk. Even if Nexus Capital is just an empty vessel, the proxy owners holding it for Preston will want a premium. We are talking about immediate liquid capital, millions of dollars. You said your accounts were frozen. You said you had $50 in your pocket. I looked at my old friend. He was right to be worried. To the world, I was a destitute old man. My credit cards were dead plastic. My bank accounts were locked tight by a court order that my ungrateful son had engineered. But Jameson had forgotten one thing. He had forgotten who my wife was. I reached into the inside pocket of my tattered wool coat. I did not pull out a checkbook. I pulled out a small black notebook. It was cheap drugstore stationery, the kind you buy for $1. The cover was worn smooth by years of handling, and the corners were bent. I opened it to the very last page. There was a string of numbers written in blue ink. The handwriting was elegant and looping. It was Catherine's handwriting. "Do you remember 40 years ago when I started Caldwell Logistics?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Do you remember what Catherine said the day I bought my first truck?" Jameson smiled a sad, nostalgic smile that softened the lines on his face. "She said you were a dreamer, Harrison. And she said dreamers need a safety net because they spend too much time looking at the clouds." "Exactly," I said. Catherine was not just a housewife, Jameson. She was the sharpest financial mind I ever met. Every month for 40 years, no matter how tight money was, no matter if we were eating beans on toast for dinner, she took 5% of our profits. She did not put it back into the company. She did not put it into the house renovation. She put it into a separate blind trust. She called it the Phoenix Trust. I slid the notebook across the desk. "Preston knows about the company accounts," I continued. "He knows about the personal savings. He knows about the investment portfolio. But he never knew about the Phoenix. Because Catherine knew. Deep down, she always knew that Preston had a weakness in his character. She used to tell me that if we gave him everything, he would value nothing. So she built a wall that he could not climb." Jameson looked at the notebook. "What is this?" "It is an offshore trust account," I said. "For 40 years, Catherine used that money to buy things Preston called boring. While he was begging me to invest in tech startups and cryptocurrency, she was buying parking lots next to stadiums. She was buying ugly warehouses near the airport. She was buying land in districts that nobody wanted until the city rezoned them 10 years later." I pointed to the computer. "Enter that account number, Jameson. Use the authorization code under it. The password is her birthday." Jameson hesitated for a second, then turned to his keyboard. He typed in the long string of digits. He paused at the password prompt, typing it in slowly. He hit enter. The screen refreshed. A loading bar spun for a few agonizing seconds. Then the balance appeared. The silence in the room was deafening. Jameson took off his glasses. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped them slowly, his hands shaking just a little. He squinted at the screen as if he thought it was a glitch. 25 million, he whispered. The number hung in the air like smoke. $25,400,000 and change. I nodded. Catherine's legacy. Preston thinks he is inheriting a fortune, but the real fortune was hidden in plain sight. He never asked about the Phoenix Trust because he thought it was just some small charity fund for her gardening club. He never respected her business sense, so he never bothered to look. Jameson looked at me, his eyes wide. "Harrison, this changes everything. With this kind of liquidity, we don't just have a defense. We have a nuclear weapon." "We aren't going to stop the sale, Jameson," I said, my voice dropping to a cold whisper. "We are going to facilitate it." Preston wants to sell Caldwell Logistics to Nexus Capital for pennies on the dollar to hide his theft. He thinks Nexus is his puppet. He thinks the registered agent in Delaware works for him. But those nominee services are loyal to one thing only: money. I leaned forward. Here is the plan. I want you to contact the registered agent of Nexus Capital immediately. Right now. Wake them up. Offer them a buyout. Offer them a premium they cannot refuse to transfer the ownership rights of the LLC to a new anonymous holding company. My holding company. Jameson's mind was racing. I could see the gears turning. You want to buy the shell entity itself? Exactly, I said. Preston used a proxy to hide his name. That is his fatal mistake. Because he is hiding, he is not listed on the deed. The proxy is. And proxies can be bought. If we buy the shell company before the closing dinner tomorrow night, we become the entity that Preston is selling to. But won't he check? Jameson asked. Won't he see the transfer? I shook my head. He is too arrogant. He is currently popping champagne bottles and planning his vacation. He thinks I am defeated. He thinks the deal is done. He will not check the back-end registry of a shell company he thinks he controls. He will walk into that dinner thinking he is the smartest man in the room. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city that was waking up. The snow had stopped, but the world was frozen and hard. I want you to use the Phoenix funds, I said. Buy Nexus Capital. Pay whatever bribe is necessary to expedite the paperwork. I want that company in my name by noon today. Jameson began typing furiously. His fatigue was gone, replaced by the adrenaline of the kill. I am drafting the offer now. We will structure it through a triple-blind trust so your name won't appear until you want it to. Good, I said. Jameson stopped typing for a second and looked up at me. Harrison, are you sure about this? Once we do this, there is no going back. You will be buying your own company back, but you will be destroying your son in the process. He will go to prison for the fraud he committed. I looked at my reflection in the glass. I looked old, tired, but my eyes were clear. My son died the day he looked at me at his mother's funeral and handed me an eviction notice. I said quietly, the man walking around with his face is just a stranger who broke into my home. I turned back to Jameson. Make the call. Buy it. I want to become the owner of the gun he is pointing at my head. And when he pulls the trigger, I want him to realize too late that the barrel is pointing back at him. Jameson hit the enter key. The transfer request was sent. The trap was set. Now we wait, I said. We wait for the invitation to the party. Jameson had the phone on speaker, and the voice crackling from the other end was slippery like used engine oil. The man was a registered agent in Delaware, a professional shade who made a living setting up paper companies for people who wanted to hide. His name was Miller, and he knew exactly what he was holding. I am looking at the file, Mr. Jameson, Miller said, his voice calm and arrogant. Nexus Capital was set up 60 days ago as a blank check vehicle, standard operating procedure. But I see activity here. There is a pending acquisition contract attached to the entity. Someone is using this shell to buy a logistics firm in Chicago. If you want to buy the shell itself, you are disrupting an active deal. That costs extra. I sat in the leather chair, gripping the armrests so hard my knuckles turned white. My phone was vibrating on the desk in front of me. It was Preston again. I glanced at the screen. It was a text message. Dad, answer the phone. The police have issued a silver alert. They are looking for a confused elderly man in a black coat. Don't make them handcuff you. Just tell me where you are. I felt a surge of bile rise in my throat. A silver alert. That was for dementia patients who wandered off and got lost in snowstorms. He had actually done it. He had weaponized the police force against his own father. Every siren I heard outside the window made my heart hammer against my ribs. If a patrol car spotted me leaving this building before the deal was done, it was over. They would drag me to Sunny Meadows and sedate me before I could say a word. Jameson looked at me, his eyes darting to my phone and then back to the speaker. "Mr. Miller," Jameson said, keeping his voice steady, "we are aware of the pending transaction. That is why my client wants to acquire the entity. We are prepared to offer $50,000 for the transfer of ownership. That is 5 times your standard fee." Miller laughed, a short, dry sound. "50,000? You must be joking. The underlying asset being targeted by Nexus is valued at $13 million. If your client wants to step into the shoes of the buyer, he is buying the potential of that deal too. The price is $200,000, non-negotiable. Wire transfer within the hour. Or I hang up and call the current proxy to tell him someone is sniffing around." Jameson muted the phone. He looked at me with wide eyes. "He is shaking us down, Harrison. He knows we are desperate. 200 grand for a piece of paper is robbery." My phone buzzed again. Another text from Preston. "Tiffany is crying, Dad. She is worried sick. We just want you safe. The officers are tracking your phone signal." I looked at the message. Tracking my phone. Of course. I had forgotten to turn off the GPS. They were closing in. I didn't have time to negotiate. I didn't have time to haggle over pennies when my life was on the line. "Pay him," I said, my voice hoarse. "Harrison, that is extortion," Jameson whispered. "I don't care," I snapped, reaching for the phone. I turned the GPS off with trembling fingers. But I knew the last ping would lead them to this block. "Pay him the 200,000, Jameson. Pay him 300 if it shuts him up faster. I don't need a bargain. I need that company name in my portfolio in the next 10 minutes. Jameson nodded grimly. He unmuted the phone. "Mr. Miller, my client agrees to your terms. $200,000. But for that price, we need the transfer of ownership executed immediately. Electronic signature. No cooling off period. And total confidentiality. The previous proxy owner must never know the entity was sold out from under him until it is too late." "Done," Miller said instantly, his greed overriding any professional ethics he might have pretended to have. "I am sending the DocuSign link now. Once the wire hits my account, Nexus Capital belongs to you." I watched Jameson switch screens. He accessed the Phoenix Trust account again. The balance of $25 million stared back at us. It was Catherine's money, fighting for Catherine's legacy. Jameson typed in the wire instructions. The amount was entered. $200,000. He hit send. The room went silent. The only sound was the humming of the computer server and the wind rattling the window pane. I stood up and walked to the window, peering through the blinds. Down on the street, 4 stories below, I saw a police cruiser roll slowly past the entrance of the building. Its lights were off, but the spotlight was scanning the sidewalks. "They are here," I whispered. Jameson didn't look up. "Processing," he said. Come on, come on." My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a text. It was a voicemail. I didn't answer, but I watched the transcription appear on the screen. "Harrison, this is Detective Miller from the Chicago PD. Your son is very worried about your mental state. We have a ping on your phone near the financial district. If you can hear this, please stay where you are. We are here to help." Help. They were there to help me into a cage. Jameson's computer made a cheerful chime sound that seemed out of place in the tension of the room. "Wire confirmed," Jameson said, letting out a long breath. Payment received. A second later, an email popped up on the main screen. It was from Miller, the registered agent. Subject: Transfer of Ownership Certificate, Nexus Capital LLC. Jameson clicked the attachment. It was a PDF document legally binding in the state of Delaware. It stated clearly that all rights, titles, and interests in Nexus Capital LLC were now the property of Phoenix Holdings, a blind trust controlled by Harrison Caldwell. "We did it," Jameson said, leaning back in his chair, his shirt soaked with sweat. "You own it, Harrison. You own the shell company." I walked back to the desk and looked at the document. It was just a piece of digital paper, but it weighed more than the building we were standing in. "Preston doesn't know," I said quietly. "No," Jameson shook his head. "The beauty of the Delaware system. The public records won't update for days. As far as Preston knows, he is still selling the company to the anonymous investors he set up. He has no idea that the man he is hunting down with police dogs is the man signing his paycheck." I picked up my phone. The notifications were piling up. Missed calls, fake pleas for mercy, threats veiled as concern. I looked at Preston's contact photo. It was a picture of us fishing 5 years ago. He was smiling, holding up a bass. I looked happy. I looked like a father who was proud of his son. I deleted the photo. "You can call off the dogs, Preston," I thought. "I am not lost. I know exactly where I am. I am the owner of the company you are trying to steal." I looked at Jameson. "Draft the final purchase agreement," I said. "The one Preston is going to sign tonight at the party. Keep all the terms he negotiated, the low price, the kickback, everything. Make it look exactly like the document he is expecting. But I want you to add one clause, Jameson. A quiet little clause on page 40. "What clause, Jameson?" asked, his fingers poised over the keyboard. "A clawback provision," I said, my eyes narrowing. "If the seller is found to have engaged in any financial malfeasance prior to the sale, the buyer reserves the right to terminate the seller's employment immediately and seize personal assets to cover damages." Jameson smiled. "That is standard in some contracts. He won't even blink at it, because he thinks he controls the buyer. He thinks he is safe." "Exactly," I said. "He thinks he is selling to a friend. He is selling to a judge, jury, and executioner." I put my phone in my pocket. The police cruiser had moved on. The danger had passed for the moment. I had the company. I had the money. And now I had the trap. Tonight, Preston was going to walk into the Ritz-Carlton feeling like a king. He was going to sell his father's legacy for 30 pieces of silver, and I was going to be there to hand him the pen. I sat down in the chair and closed my eyes for the first time in 20 hours. I wasn't tired anymore. I was ready. The game was set. The pieces were moving. And the king was about to fall. My phone vibrated against the hard surface of Jameson's desk. It was a rhythmic buzzing that sounded like a warning siren in the quiet office. I looked at the screen. It was Preston again. But this time, I did not ignore it. I did not let it go to voicemail. I took a deep breath and let the air out of my lungs, slowly trying to empty myself of the rage that had been fueling me for the last 12 hours. I had to become the character they had written for me. I had to become the confused, broken old man who had lost his way in the snow. I pressed the green button and held the phone to my ear. I did not say anything at first. I just let my breathing sound heavy and ragged. "Dad, is that you?" Preston's voice came through the speaker. It was different now. The panic was gone, replaced by a tone of smooth, practiced concern. It was the voice he used when he was trying to sell a client on a bad deal. "Dad, where have you been? We've been worried sick. Tiffany has been crying all morning." I waited a beat before answering, letting my voice tremble just enough to sound convincing. "I am safe, Preston. I just needed to walk. I needed to think. My head is so cloudy." I heard him exhale a long sigh of relief. Or maybe it was just the relief of knowing his problem was back within reaching distance. "Thank God," he said. "Look, Dad, I know things got heated yesterday. I know you are upset about the house and the company, but you have to understand we are doing this for you. We are trying to save what is left before the bank takes it all." I listened to his lie. It slid out of his mouth so easily. He didn't know that I had the real bank records sitting right in front of me. He didn't know that I owned the very company he was trying to impress. "I know, son," I said, forcing the words out through gritted teeth. "I am just tired, Preston. I am so tired of fighting." "I know you are," Preston said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And that is why I have good news. Great news, actually. I spoke to the investors at Nexus Capital. I told them about your situation. I told them you are the founder and that you deserve respect." He paused for effect, waiting for me to thank him. I stayed silent, gripping the edge of the desk until my knuckles turned white. "They agreed to a special provision, Dad," Preston continued. "If you come to the signing ceremony tonight at the Ritz-Carlton and sign a consensus agreement, basically just giving your blessing to the sale, they are willing to increase your payout." He waited again. I played my part. "Increase it to what?" I asked, my voice sounding weak and greedy. $50,000, Preston said. He said the number like he was offering me the crown jewels. Instead of 10,000, you walk away with 50,000. That is enough to get you the premium suite at Sunny Meadows. You could have a view of the garden. All you have to do is show up, shake a few hands, and sign the paper. It is just for optics, Dad. They want to see a united family. $50,000, the price of a mid-range sedan. That was what my life's work was worth to him. That was the price of my dignity. He was buying my silence with crumbs from the loaf of bread he had stolen from my table. I closed my eyes. The old Harrison Caldwell would have screamed. He would have told him to go to hell. But the new Harrison, the one who played the long game, knew better. 50,000, I repeated slowly, as if I was processing a complex equation. That is a lot of money, Preston. It is a fortune, Dad, he urged. But you have to be there tonight. 7 o'clock, the Ritz-Carlton ballroom. Can you make it? Do you need me to send a car? No, I said quickly. I don't want a car. I will find my own way. I want to arrive on my own terms. Okay, fine, Preston said. Just be there. And Dad, please try to pull yourself together. These are serious people. We need to look professional. I will be there, Preston, I said. I promise. I hung up the phone. The silence returned to the office, but the air felt charged with electricity. Jameson looked at me from across the room. He didn't say anything, but he raised an eyebrow. He offered me $50,000, I said, my voice flat, to sign away $13 million. Jameson shook his head. He thinks you are desperate. I am desperate, I said, standing up. Desperate to see the look on his face when the curtain falls. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text message. I looked down. It was from Tiffany. Of course she couldn't let Preston handle it alone. She had to add her own touch of venom to the invitation. The message read, Dad, I am glad you are coming tonight. Please do us a favor. Don't wear your tuxedo. It is too old-fashioned, and frankly, it smells like mothballs. Just wear that gray suit you had on at the funeral. The investors know you are retired and not in good health, so it is better if you look a bit frail. It makes the hardship story more believable. We don't want to look like we are bullying you. We want to look like we are saving you. I read the message twice. She wanted me to look frail. She wanted me to look like a charity case, so that when they announced the sale, the investors would nod and say, "Yes, it is a mercy that they are taking the company out of that old man's hands." She wanted to use my humiliation as a prop for their success. I walked over to the small mirror hanging on the back of Jameson's office door. I looked at myself. I was still wearing the same clothes I had fled the house in. My shirt was wrinkled. My tie was a cheap polyester one I had bought at a drugstore years ago because I had spilled coffee on my good one. My hair was disheveled. My eyes were rimmed with red from lack of sleep. I looked exactly like what they wanted. I looked like a loser. I reached up and loosened the tie, making it hang slightly crooked. I unbuttoned the top button of my shirt, exposing my aging neck. I slumped my shoulders slightly, practicing the posture of defeat. They want a performance, I whispered to my reflection. They want the tragic final act of Harrison Caldwell. Jameson walked up behind me. He handed me a folder. Inside were the documents we had prepared. The real documents. "Are you ready for this?" Harrison Jameson asked. "Once you walk into that ballroom, there is no turning back. You will be surrounded by their lawyers, their security, their lies." I took the folder and tucked it inside my coat, right next to my beating heart. I patted the pocket. I have never been more ready in my life, Jameson. They invited a sheep to the slaughter, but they forgot to check if the sheep had fangs. I turned away from the mirror. I checked my watch. It was 6 o'clock. The game was about to begin. I visualized Preston's smile. And then I visualized the moment the smile would die. "Drive fast," I whispered. "I don't want to be late for my own funeral." The Ritz-Carlton ballroom smelled of expensive perfume and betrayal. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen explosions of light, casting a diamond glow over the crowd of 300 people. These were the elite of Chicago, the bankers, the investors, the sharks in Italian silk suits who smelled blood in the water. And tonight, I was the bait. I stood at the entrance of the ballroom, hesitating just long enough to let the doorman look at me with pity. I was wearing the gray suit Tiffany had demanded. It was 2 sizes too big for me now because grief had eaten away at my appetite for the last month. I had deliberately left the top button of my shirt undone, and I had rubbed my eyes until they were red and watery. I hunched my shoulders, curving my spine to lose 3 inches of height. I was no longer Harrison Caldwell, the titan of industry. I was Harrison Caldwell, the tragic cautionary tale. Tiffany spotted me first. She was wearing a red dress that cost more than my first house. She cut through the crowd like a knife, her smile bright and terrifying. She hooked her arm through mine, but her grip was like a vice. "You actually came," she hissed into my ear while beaming at a passing senator. "And look at you. You look pathetic, Harrison. Perfect. Just try not to drool on anyone." She pulled me into the center of the room. Preston was there, holding a glass of champagne and holding court with a group of potential investors. When he saw me, his eyes lit up. Not with love, but with the excitement of a magician who is about to perform his best trick. "Everyone," he announced, his voice booming over the gentle jazz music, "my father has arrived." The conversation in the room died down. 300 pairs of eyes turned to look at me. I saw the whispers start behind raised hands. I saw the shaking of heads. Preston walked over and put a heavy hand on my shoulder. He squeezed it tight. "Dad, I am so glad you could make it," he said loud enough for the back of the room to hear. "I was just telling everyone about the transition. I know it has been a hard year for you. I know things have gotten fuzzy." He turned to the crowd, his face arranging itself into a mask of dutiful sorrow. "It is heartbreaking, really," Preston said, addressing the room. "My father built this company from nothing. But age comes for us all. In the last year, he made some unfortunate decisions. Bad investments, forgotten accounts. We nearly lost everything because of his condition. I stood there and let him paint me as the villain of my own life. I let my jaw hang open slightly. I let my hands tremble at my sides. But Preston continued, raising his glass. "That is why tonight is a celebration. We have found a partner to save the legacy. We are stepping in to correct the mistakes and ensure that Harrison is taken care of for the rest of his days." A ripple of applause went through the room. They were clapping for him. The Savior's son, the martyr who was cleaning up the mess of his senile father. Tiffany handed me a glass of water. "Here, Dad," she said loudly. "Don't spill it." I took the glass and deliberately let it slip through my fingers. It shattered on the marble floor with a loud crash. Water splashed onto the shoes of a man standing nearby. "Oh, God," Preston sighed, playing the role perfectly. He snapped his fingers at a waiter. "Someone clean this up. I am so sorry, everyone. He is having a bad day." I looked down at the broken glass. I mumbled an apology, my voice weak and thready. "I am sorry. I didn't mean to. My hands, they don't work like they used to." "Poor old thing," a woman in pearls whispered near me. "It is a kindness that they are putting him in a home." I swallowed the rage that tasted like bile in my throat. "Keep talking," I thought. "Keep pitying me. Every insult you throw is just more fuel for the fire I am about to light." Preston guided me away from the mess, steering me toward a private table set up on a raised platform at the front of the room. Seated there was a man in a dark suit. He was bald, with a sharp face and glasses that reflected the light. He looked like a ruthless corporate executioner. This was the man I had hired. His name was Mr. Sterling, but to everyone in this room, he was the feared representative of Nexus Capital. He was an actor I had found through a casting agency in New York, and I had paid him $10,000 to fly here and play the role of a stone-cold buyer. Dad, Preston said, pushing me into a chair. "This is Mr. Sterling. He represents the new owners. He is the one saving us." Sterling looked at me. His face was unreadable. He didn't blink. He extended a hand. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "It is an honor to finally meet the man behind the myth." I reached out and shook his hand. I squeezed it twice. The signal. "Thank you," I mumbled. "Thank you for helping my boy." Preston leaned in close to Sterling. He lowered his voice, but I heard every word. "Don't worry about the old man," Preston whispered. "His brain is mush. He doesn't even know what day it is. He will sign whatever you put in front of him. Just get the papers ready. I want this done before he has another accident." Sterling nodded slowly. "I understand, Mr. Caldwell. We have the documents prepared exactly as you requested." Sterling reached down and opened a black leather briefcase. The sound of the latches clicking open echoed in the sudden silence of the room. The guests had gathered around the platform, sensing the climax of the evening. They wanted to see the torch passed. They wanted to see the old king abdicate his throne. Sterling pulled out a thick stack of papers bound in blue velvet. The contract. Preston looked at it with hunger in his eyes. He licked his lips. This was it. The moment he had been scheming for since the day his mother got sick. The moment he would legally steal $13 million and kick me to the curb with 50 grand. Tiffany came up behind me and placed her hands on my shoulders. She dug her fingernails in slightly. "Smile, Dad," she whispered. "This is a happy occasion." Preston picked up a heavy gold pen from the table. He uncapped it and held it out to me. "Okay, Dad," Preston said, his voice loud and cheerful. "Just sign right here on the dotted line. It is a standard transfer agreement. It just says you are retiring and handing the reins to Nexus Capital." I looked at the pen. I looked at the paper. I looked at the crowd of faces staring at me. They saw a confused old man about to sign away his life. I reached out and took the pen. My hand shook violently. "Where?" I asked, my voice quavering. "Where do I sign?" "Right there," Preston said, pointing to the line marked Seller. "Just put your name there and you can go rest. We have the car waiting to take you to Sunny Meadows." I held the pen over the paper. The tip hovered inches from the line. I looked up at Sterling. The actor gave me the slightest nod. Then I looked at Preston. I stopped shaking. I sat up straight. The confusion vanished from my eyes like smoke in a strong wind. I gripped the pen firmly. Preston frowned. He saw the change. He saw the steel return to my spine. "Dad?" he asked uncertainly. "What are you waiting for?" "I am just reading the fine print, son," I said, my voice clear and strong. It rang through the ballroom without a microphone. "Fine print?" Preston laughed nervously. "You can't even read the menu, Dad. Just sign it." "No," I said. I placed the pen down on the table with a deliberate click. "I don't think I will." The room went deadly silent. Tiffany's grip on my shoulder tightened. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "Pick up the pen." I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I smoothed my tie. I looked out at the crowd, and for the first time all night, I looked like Harrison Caldwell. I turned to Mr. Sterling. "Mr. Sterling," I said loudly, "before we proceed, I think there is a misunderstanding about the ownership structure of this deal." Preston stepped forward, his face flushing red. "Dad, sit down. You are making a scene." "Mr. Sterling, please excuse him." Sterling stood up. He ignored Preston. He looked directly at me. "There is no misunderstanding, sir," Sterling said, reaching into his briefcase again. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was the transfer certificate from Delaware. "Preston, what is this?" Preston snapped, snatching the paper from Sterling's hand. I watched him read it. I watched the color drain from his face. I watched his knees buckle. "It says," I said, my voice cold as the grave, "that Nexus Capital was purchased this morning by a private trust." Preston looked up at me. His eyes were wide with terror. "Who?" he whispered. "Who bought it?" I smiled, and this time it was a shark's smile. "Turn the page, Preston." He turned the page. He saw the signature at the bottom. I watched his lips move as he read the name. Harrison Caldwell. I leaned in close to him, so close I could smell the fear coming off him. "I am the buyer, Preston. You were trying to sell my company. To me." Preston stared at me for a second, his mouth slightly open as my declaration hung in the air. But then a look of pity washed over his face. He shook his head and let out a short, condescending laugh that was meant to reassure the nervous investors in the room. He turned to the crowd and gestured at me with his palm open. "You see, everyone," he said, his voice oozing with fake sympathy. "This is exactly what I was talking about. My father thinks he is the buyer. He is confused. He is living in a fantasy world. It is the dementia talking." He turned back to me and lowered his voice to a whisper that was sharp as a razor. "Dad, sit down and stop embarrassing yourself. You don't own anything. You can't even buy a sandwich without my permission. Now let the adults do business." He turned his back on me, dismissing me completely. He thought my claim was just the rambling of a senile old man. He was so arrogant, so sure of his victory, that he didn't even pause to consider if I was telling the truth. He turned to Mr. Sterling, the man playing the part of the Nexus representative perfectly. "I apologize for the interruption, Mr. Sterling," Preston said, smoothing his tie. "Let us conclude this. I want to get the paperwork signed so we can get him the medical attention he obviously needs." Sterling didn't smile. He adjusted his glasses and pushed the heavy contract across the table. "As you wish, Mr. Caldwell," Sterling said. "However, before you sign the final transfer of assets, please review Appendix C on page 40. It details the executive compensation package we discussed privately." Preston's eyes lit up. This was what he had been waiting for. The bribe. The kickback. He flipped the pages greedily, his fingers trembling slightly with anticipation. I watched him from my standing position. I knew exactly what was written on that page, because I had dictated every single word to Jameson at 4 a.m. while drinking stale coffee. Preston's eyes scanned the page and stopped at the paragraph halfway down. I could see the reflection of the text in his eyes, but more importantly, I saw the reflection of the number. $5 million. The clause was simple. It stated that upon the successful sale of Caldwell Logistics to Nexus Capital, the selling CEO, which was Preston, would receive a consulting fee of $5 million, deposited directly into a numbered Swiss account of his choosing. This fee was to be kept confidential and was separate from the purchase price of the company. In the legal world, this is called a kickback. In the criminal world, it is called embezzlement. By signing a contract that gave him a secret personal profit at the expense of the company's shareholders, he was committing a felony. He was proving intent to defraud. But Preston didn't see a felony. He saw a yacht. He saw a vacation home in Aspen. He saw the freedom to leave Tiffany if he wanted to. He saw pure, unadulterated cash. He was so mesmerized by the $5 million figure that he completely ignored the paragraph immediately preceding it. The paragraph that Jameson had inserted in a slightly smaller font. I recited the words in my head as I watched him read. The seller hereby assumes unlimited personal liability for any and all financial discrepancies found in the company records post-acquisition. In the event of fraud, embezzlement, or misrepresentation of assets, the seller agrees to forfeit all personal assets, including real estate investments and liquid cash, to satisfy the buyer's claims. Furthermore, the seller waives the protection of the corporate veil. It was a death sentence. It meant that if the company books were cooked, which they were, Preston would not just lose his job. He would lose everything he owned. He would be stripped naked by the law. But he didn't read it. He didn't even glance at it. His eyes were glued to the prize. "Is this acceptable, Mr. Caldwell?" Sterling asked, his voice flat. Preston looked up, a wide grin spreading across his face. "It is more than acceptable. It is perfect." Tiffany leaned over his shoulder, reading the number. Her breath hitched. 5 million. She squeezed his arm, her nails digging into his suit jacket. "Sign it," she whispered. "Sign it before they change their minds." Preston picked up the heavy gold pen again. This time his hand didn't shake. This time he looked like a man who had just won the lottery. He placed the tip of the pen on the signature line. The scratching sound of the nib against the expensive paper seemed to echo in the silent ballroom. He signed his name with a flourish. Preston Caldwell, CEO. He signed it once on the main page. He flipped to the appendix. He signed it again right below the kickback clause and right below the personal liability clause. With each stroke of the pen, he was tightening the noose around his own neck. He was signing away his freedom. He was signing away the house he had stolen from me. He was signing away his future. He capped the pen with a satisfying click and stood up. He handed the contract to Sterling, and then he turned to me. He looked at me with triumph burning in his eyes. He thought he had just pulled off the heist of the century. He thought he was $5 million richer, and that I was his problem to dispose of. "Well, Dad," he said loud enough for the room to hear, "it is done. The company is sold. The house is sold. And you are officially retired." He took a step toward me, invading my personal space. "I hope you enjoy Sunny Meadows," he whispered. "I hear the pudding is excellent." "Congratulations, Dad. You are officially empty-handed. You have nothing." He started to turn away, ready to accept the applause of the room, ready to drink the champagne and celebrate his victory. I let the silence hang for a split second. I let him take one step toward the edge of the platform. Then I spoke. My voice was not the voice of a frail old man. It was the voice that had commanded union halls and boardrooms for 40 years. It was a voice of thunder. "Quanda," I said in English. "Wait." Preston stopped. He turned back, annoyed. "What now, Dad? It is over." I reached into my inside pocket. I pulled out my own pen, a cheap plastic ballpoint pen I had picked up from the lawyer's office. "No, Preston," I said, walking toward the table. "It is not over." I looked at Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, I believe the contract requires one more signature to be valid." Sterling nodded. "Correct. The buyer must countersign to accept the terms." Preston rolled his eyes. "Exactly. So let Mr. Sterling sign it, and let's go." I shook my head. "Mr. Sterling is not the buyer, son. He is just a representative. The owner of Nexus Capital must sign." Preston laughed. "And who is that? Some sheikh in Dubai? Is he here?" I walked past Preston. I walked up to the table. I looked down at the contract where his signature was still wet. I looked him dead in the eye. "I told you, Preston. I bought the company this morning." I bent down. I pressed my plastic pen to the line marked Buyer. And in big, bold letters, I wrote my name. Harrison Caldwell. I stood up and capped my pen. I picked up the contract and held it up for him to see. "Now it is done," I said. "And now that I am the owner of this company, and I am looking at this contract you just signed admitting to a $5 million kickback, I think we need to have a very serious conversation about my money." The color drained from Preston's face so fast it looked like his soul had left his body. Tiffany dropped her champagne glass. It shattered on the floor, but this time nobody looked at the mess. They were all looking at me. the old man who had just snapped the trap shut. The silence that followed my declaration at the table was heavy, but it was localized. The people in the back of the room were still murmuring, still drinking their champagne, unaware that the tectonic plates of power had just shifted beneath their feet. Preston stood frozen, staring at the contract in my hand, his brain struggling to process the impossible reality I had just presented to him. He blinked rapidly, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. I did not give him time to recover. I did not give him time to formulate a lie or to call security. I turned my back on him. I walked past the stunned Mr. Sterling, who was gathering his papers with the efficiency of a man who knew his job was done. I walked toward the center of the stage, where the podium stood. Preston snapped out of his trance. He lunged forward, grabbing my arm. His grip was desperate, painful. "Dad, what the hell are you doing?" he hissed, his voice cracking with panic. "Get back to your seat. You are making a fool of yourself. Give me the microphone." I looked down at his hand on my sleeve. I looked at it with the same detachment one might look at a stain on a coat. I didn't pull away. I didn't shout. I simply leaned in close to his ear and whispered one word: "Checkmate." I pulled my arm free with a sharp jerk that made him stumble back. I stepped up to the podium. The wood felt cool under my hands. I looked out at the sea of faces. 300 of Chicago's elite. Bankers, lawyers, rivals, and friends. They were looking at me with confusion, expecting a senile ramble or a tearful goodbye. I tapped the microphone. The sound boomed through the speakers, a sharp feedback loop that cut through the chatter instantly. Every head turned. Every conversation died. The room went silent. I stood tall. I let the hunch in my shoulders disappear. I let the red-rimmed eyes clear. The man who stood before them was not the broken widower in the oversized suit. It was Harrison Caldwell, the man who had built an empire with his bare hands. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice steady and commanding, echoing off the crystal chandeliers. "I apologize for the interruption. My son has been telling you all evening that tonight is a night of transition. He told you that Caldwell Logistics is being sold to a new owner." I paused. I saw Preston down to my right, signaling frantically to the sound technician to cut the mic. But the technician didn't move. He was looking at me, mesmerized by the sudden transformation. "My son was right about one thing," I continued. "The company has indeed been sold. The contract has just been signed. The deal is closed." Preston started walking up the stairs toward me, his face flushed with rage. "Dad, stop this now! You are sick!" I pointed a finger at him, a finger that felt like a loaded gun. "Stay right there, Preston." The authority in my voice froze him in his tracks. He stopped halfway up the stairs, looking unsure for the first time in his life. I turned back to the crowd. "You see, my son orchestrated this sale because he believed the company was failing. He believed that I was too old, too weak, and too confused to run it. He found a buyer called Nexus Capital, a company he told me was a savior, a company he told you was a strategic partner." I looked directly at Preston. "But Preston, you forgot the first rule of business. You never sign a contract without knowing who is sitting on the other side of the table. You were so busy looking at the $5 million kickback you secured for yourself that you never asked the most important question." Preston's face went pale. He knew I knew about the money, but he still didn't understand the scope of the trap. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small remote control. It controlled the massive LED screen behind me, which had been displaying the Nexus Capital logo all night. "You sold the company to Nexus Capital," I said, my voice rising. "You signed the deed. You signed the asset transfer. And most importantly, you signed a clause accepting unlimited personal liability for fraud." I pressed the button on the remote. The screen behind me flickered. The logo vanished. In its place, a high-resolution image of the Delaware corporate filing appeared. It was massive, 10 feet tall. The text was crisp and clear. State of Delaware, Certificate of Ownership. Nexus Capital, LLC. And there at the bottom, magnified for everyone to see, was the name of the sole proprietor. The name of the man who now owned every truck, every warehouse, and every brick of the Caldwell empire. Harrison Caldwell. The collective gasp from the audience sucked the air out of the room. It was a physical sound, a wave of shock that rippled from the front row to the back. I turned to Preston. He was staring at the screen. His eyes were wide, enormous circles of white in a face that had turned the color of ash. He looked from the screen to me, and then back to the screen. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He swayed on his feet and grabbed the railing of the stairs to keep from falling. "You," I heard him whisper. "It was you." "Yes, Preston," I said into the microphone, ensuring every soul heard it. "I am the buyer. I used my own money to buy the shell company you tried to hide behind. You didn't sell the family business to strangers. You sold it back to me. And in doing so, you just signed a confession admitting to embezzlement and fraud." I took a step closer to the edge of the stage, looking down at him. "You tried to steal my house. You tried to steal my legacy. You tried to put me in a home and forget I existed. But you forgot one thing, son. You were playing a game that I invented." The silence in the room was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. It was the kind of silence that usually accompanies execution. Tiffany was standing at the bottom of the stairs. Her hand was frozen halfway to her mouth. She was holding a glass of expensive red wine. As the reality of what I had said sank in, as she realized the $5 million was gone, as she realized the house was gone, as she realized her husband was not a genius, but a fool, her fingers lost their strength. The glass slipped from her hand. It hit the marble floor with a sound that seemed as loud as a gunshot. The crystal shattered, sending shards and red liquid exploding across the pristine white hem of her dress, looking like a spray of blood. She didn't look down. She just stared at me, terror filling her eyes. I looked at her. I looked at Preston. And then I looked out at the crowd. "The show is over," I said quietly, putting the microphone back on the stand. "But the justice is just beginning." I walked down the stairs, past my son, who was now trembling uncontrollably, past my daughter-in-law, who was sobbing silently, and I walked toward the exit. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. They didn't look at me with pity anymore. They looked at me with fear and respect. I was Harrison Caldwell, and I had just taken back my world. The heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open with a solemn thud that echoed through the silent room. Jameson walked in. He did not walk like a man entering a party. He walked like a general entering a conquered city. Behind him marched the phalanx of 6 men and women in dark suits carrying briefcases. They were not police officers. They were something far more terrifying to a man like Preston. They were forensic accountants and federal auditors. Preston looked at them, and then he looked back at me. The color had not returned to his face. He looked like a man who had just seen the guillotine blade gleaming in the sunlight. "Who are they?" Preston whispered, his voice trembling so much it was barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. "They are the cleaning crew," I said into the microphone, ensuring every investor in the room heard me. I stepped down from the podium and walked toward the table where Preston was still clutching the edge of the tablecloth. I looked him in the eye. I didn't see my son anymore. I saw a cancer that needed to be cut out. "Preston Caldwell," I said, my voice calm and deadly. "As the sole owner of Nexus Capital, and by extension the new owner of Caldwell Logistics, I am exercising my first executive order." Preston tried to stand up straighter, tried to salvage some shred of dignity in front of the watching crowd. "You can't do this, Dad. I am the CEO. I have a contract." I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. "You had a contract, Preston, but you just violated every fiduciary duty listed in it. You see that clause regarding the $5 million kickback you just signed for?" I pointed to the papers scattered on the table. "That is undeniable proof of insider trading and embezzlement. You accepted a bribe to sell the company below market value. That is gross misconduct." I leaned in closer. "You are fired, Preston. Effective immediately. Get out of my chair." The room gasped again. To see a father fire his son publicly was a spectacle none of them had ever witnessed. But I wasn't done. Firing him was just the mercy kill. Now came the torture. Preston swallowed hard. "Fine," he spat out, trying to regain some bravado. "Fire me. I don't care. I have my payout. I have the $10,000 you gave me, and I have my savings. I will start my own company. I will crush you. Come on, Tiffany, let's go." He turned to grab Tiffany's hand, but I raised my voice, stopping him in his tracks. "You are not going anywhere, Preston, and neither is your money." I signaled to Jameson. He stepped forward and opened a legal file, placing it on top of the contract Preston had just signed. "You didn't read the fine print, did you, son?" I asked, shaking my head with mock disappointment. "The clause you signed wasn't just about the kickback. It was a personal liability waiver." I picked up the document and read from it loudly. "The seller agrees to assume unlimited personal liability for any financial discrepancies discovered post-acquisition. In the event of fraud, the buyer reserves the right to seize personal assets to recoup losses." I looked at Preston. "Do you understand what that means?" "It means nothing," Preston stammered. "The company is fine. There are no discrepancies." "Really?" I asked. Jameson stepped forward. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Caldwell," Jameson said, addressing Preston formally, "we have just completed a preliminary audit of the company accounts. We found payments totaling $10.4 million to 3 entities: Redstone Energy, Blue Horizon Consulting, and Apex Maintenance." Preston froze. Those were his shell companies, the ones he thought were secret. "We have traced the ownership of those entities," Jameson continued relentlessly. "They are all registered to a post office box in Gary, Indiana, which is paid for by a credit card in the name of Tiffany Caldwell." The crowd turned their eyes to Tiffany. She shrank back, clutching her purse as if it contained the stolen money. "That is $10 million stolen from the company," I said, taking over. "And since I now own the company, you owe me that money." "I don't have $10 million, Preston screamed, losing his composure completely. "You know I don't." "I know," I said coldly. "But you have assets." I started counting them off on my fingers, pacing around him like a predator circling wounded prey. You have a penthouse in the Gold Coast, valued at $2 million. That is mine now. Preston shook his head. No, it is in my name. Not anymore, I said. The liability clause pierces the corporate veil. I have already filed a lien against it. The locks are being changed as we speak. I took another step. You have a vacation home in Lake Geneva, valued at $1.5 million. Mine. Preston was breathing fast, hyperventilating. You have a portfolio of stocks. Mine. You have 2 Teslas and a Porsche in the garage. Mine. I stopped right in front of him. And that $5 million kickback you thought you were getting? That transaction has been flagged as fraudulent. The bank has frozen it. You will never see a dime of it. I leaned in so close our noses were almost touching. You are not just fired, Preston. You are bankrupt. You are negative $10 million in debt. You are walking out of here with less than I had when I walked out of my house yesterday. I had $50. You have nothing. Preston looked around the room looking for an ally, looking for a lawyer, looking for anyone to tell him this was a nightmare. But no one moved. The sharks in the room knew the law. They knew he had signed his own death warrant. He was toxic. He was finished. He slumped against the table, his legs finally giving out. He looked up at me with tears streaming down his face. "Dad, please," he whimpered. "I am your son. You can't leave me with nothing." I looked down at him. I felt a flicker of the old fatherly love, a tiny spark of pity. But then I remembered the eviction notice. I remembered the funeral. I remembered the cold wind on my face as I stood locked out of my own home. "I didn't leave you with nothing, Preston," I said softly. "I left you with the consequences of your actions." I turned my attention to Tiffany. She was standing a few feet away, trembling. Her face was a mask of pure horror. But it wasn't horror at what had happened to her husband. It was horror at the realization that the ATM machine had just been smashed. "Tiffany," I said, acknowledging her for the first time, "I see you are doing the math." She looked at me, her eyes darting around the room. "Preston is broke," I told her. "He has no house. He has no car. He has no job. And since you are listed as the co-conspirator on those shell companies, your personal assets are also frozen. That necklace you were wearing? The one I bought? I suggest you hand it over to the auditors on your way out. It is company property." Tiffany let out a strangled sound. She looked at Preston, who was sobbing into his hands. The veneer of the perfect wife, the loving partner, cracked and fell away instantly. "You idiot!" she screamed. The sound tore through the ballroom. She lunged at Preston. She didn't look like a socialite anymore. She looked like a wild animal trapped in a corner. She began to hit him, pounding her fists against his back, his head, his shoulders. "You told me this was foolproof," she shrieked, her voice shrill and ugly. "You told me he was senile. You told me we were going to be rich. You stupid, useless coward!" Preston tried to shield himself, cowering away from her blows. "Tiffany, stop, please," he begged. She didn't stop. She grabbed the lapels of his expensive jacket and shook him violently. "You lost everything!" she screamed, spitting in his face. "My house, my money, you lost it all because you couldn't read a contract. I hate you. I never should have married a loser like you." The crowd watched in morbid fascination. The perfect couple, the golden children of Chicago, were tearing each other apart on stage. It was ugly. It was raw. And it was the truth, finally revealing itself. "Security," I said calmly into the microphone. Two large guards stepped out from the shadows. They moved efficiently. One grabbed Tiffany, pulling her off Preston. She was kicking and screaming, cursing my name, cursing Preston's name, cursing the world. "Get off me!" she yelled, thrashing in the guard's grip. "Do you know who I am?" "You are nobody," I said, answering her. "You were a trespasser." The other guard hauled Preston to his feet. He hung limp like a rag doll, his spirit completely broken. He looked at me one last time as they dragged him toward the exit. His eyes were empty. "Dad," he whispered. "Goodbye, Preston," I said. I watched them being dragged out of the ballroom. I watched the heavy doors swing shut behind them, sealing them out of the world of wealth and privilege they had thought was their birthright. The room was silent again, but the air was lighter. The rot had been removed. I turned back to the audience. I adjusted my tie. I smoothed my jacket. "I am sorry for the disturbance," I said. I looked at Mr. Sterling, who was still standing there clutching his briefcase. "Mr. Sterling, I believe we have a company to run." Sterling smiled a genuine smile this time. "Yes, sir," he said. "We certainly do." I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw respect. I saw fear. But mostly, I saw that they understood. Harrison Caldwell was back, and he was not a man to be trifled with. I walked down the steps of the podium. My knee didn't hurt anymore. My back was straight. I felt 20 years younger. Jameson walked up to me and handed me a glass of champagne. "To the Phoenix Trust," he whispered, clinking his glass against mine. I took a sip. It tasted cold and crisp. It tasted like victory. "To the Phoenix," I said. And as the jazz band hesitantly started to play again, I knew that the story of my demise had been greatly exaggerated. I was just getting started. The last of the guests had filtered out, leaving only a few staff members sweeping up the remnants of the evening. But the silence didn't last long. It was broken by the wail of sirens outside, cutting through the cold night air like a knife. The heavy double doors burst open again, and this time it wasn't auditors. It was men in windbreakers with the letters FBI emblazoned on the back. They moved with practiced efficiency. Jameson, standing by my side, gave a small nod. He had done his job perfectly. The evidence of money laundering, the wire transfers to offshore accounts, the tax evasion, it had all been compiled and delivered days ago. Tonight was just the final act. They found Preston slumped in a chair in the lobby, his face buried in his hands. When they pulled him up, he didn't fight. He looked like a ghost. But when the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, the reality of his situation finally pierced through his shock. He looked up and saw me standing at the top of the stairs, watching him. "Dad!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "Dad, help me! Please! You can't let them take me!" I walked down the stairs slowly, step by step, the sound of my shoes on the marble the only answer he got. I stopped a few feet away. The agents paused, giving me a moment. Preston's eyes were wild, filled with tears and desperation. "Dad, please! I'm your son! I'm your flesh and blood! You can't do this to your own family!" I looked at him, searching for the boy I had raised. I searched for the toddler I had taught to walk, the teenager I had taught to drive. But they were gone. In their place stood a stranger who had looked me in the eye at his mother's funeral and handed me an eviction notice. "I didn't raise a thief," I said, my voice quiet but echoing in the large hall. And I certainly didn't raise a man who would throw his own father into the street to buy a yacht. "Dad, I'm sorry," he sobbed, pulling against the cuffs.
"I made a mistake. I'll fix it. Just tell them to stop."
I shook my head slowly. "A mistake is forgetting to take out the trash, Preston. A mistake is a bad investment. What you did wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. You chose greed over loyalty. You chose money over family." I stepped closer, my face hardening. "My son died the day he sold me out for a check," I whispered, cold as ice. "The man standing here is just a defendant." I nodded to the agents. "Take him." "No!" Preston screamed as they dragged him toward the revolving doors. "Dad!" I didn't look away. I watched until he was shoved into the back of an unmarked car. I watched as the lights faded into the distance. I felt a pang in my chest, a deep, aching hollow where my heart used to be. But it wasn't regret. It was grief. I was mourning the living, not the dead. I turned to Jameson. "Thank you," I said. He put a hand on my shoulder. "It's done, Harrison. It's finally done." I nodded. "Not quite. There's one more thing." I took a cab back to the estate. It was past midnight when I arrived. The lights were still on. Tiffany was there, frantically packing suitcases in the hallway. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes red and puffy. "You," she hissed, "you ruined everything." I didn't even stop walking. "Get out," I said. "This is my house," she shrieked. "You can't just—" I stopped and turned to her. The look in my eyes made the words die in her throat. "This house belongs to Caldwell Logistics," I said, "which belongs to me. You are trespassing. You have 10 minutes to take whatever you can carry and leave. If you are still here at 12:30, I will have the police remove you, just like they removed your husband." She stared at me, her mouth open. She looked around at the grand staircase, the chandelier, the life she had thought was hers forever. Then she looked at me, and she saw the stone wall she was up against. She grabbed 2 Louis Vuitton bags and ran out the door without another word. I closed the door behind her and locked it. The click of the deadbolt was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I was alone. I walked into the living room and sat down in my old armchair, the leather worn and comfortable. The house was quiet. No more screaming, no more lies. Just the ticking of the grandfather clock and the wind outside. I reached for the framed photo on the side table. It was Catherine, smiling in the garden, the sun catching the gray in her hair. I ran my thumb over the glass. "M," I whispered into the silence. "I did it. I took out the trash." I leaned back, closing my eyes. I was tired, bone-deep tired. But for the first time in weeks, I wasn't afraid. I picked up the phone and dialed Jameson one last time. "Harrison, is everything okay?" he asked, sounding worried. "It's fine, Jameson," I said. "I just wanted to give you instructions for the trust." "Okay, I'm listening." "I want 80% of my assets. Everything. The company profits, the real estate, the liquid cash, to go into a new foundation," I said. "The Catherine Caldwell Foundation for the Elderly. I want to build homes, real homes, not warehouses like Sunny Meadows. Places where people can age with dignity." "And the rest?" Jameson asked. "The rest goes into an educational trust for my future grandchildren, if there ever are any. I said. But with a condition. They don't get a dime until they turn 30, and only if they can prove they've built something of their own first. No free rides, not anymore. Understood, Jameson said softly. It's a good legacy, Harrison. I hung up the phone. I looked around the empty room. I had lost my son. I had lost my wife. But I had kept my soul. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, the good stuff I had hidden away. I raised it to the empty room. Here's to the long game, I said. And as I took a sip, the warmth spreading through my chest, I knew that tomorrow would be a new day. A day where I answered to no one but myself. 6 months have passed since the night the handcuffs clicked around my son's wrists. The brutal Chicago winter has finally melted away, revealing the green grass of the estate, much like the truth finally revealed the rot that had infested my family. I visit Catherine's grave every Sunday. But now, I don't go with a heavy heart burdened by secrets. I go to tell her about the work we are doing. The Catherine Caldwell Center broke ground last week. It is a massive project. A sanctuary for the elderly who, like me, were discarded by their families as soon as they became inconvenient. But unlike me, they didn't have a secret fortune to fight back with. Now, they have mine. Jameson came by yesterday with a final update on the unhappy couple. It seems the prison walls have not been kind to Preston. He sent me a letter from his cell. It wasn't an apology. It was a 3-page rant, blaming Tiffany for corrupting his potential, and asking if I could put money in his commissary account because the prison food is inedible. I burned the letter in the fireplace without replying. He still doesn't get it. He thinks consequences are just a temporary inconvenience that his father will eventually fix. He is wrong. And Tiffany? Justice for her was poetic. Jameson's forensic team found that she had used company funds to pay for the lease on her high-end boutique. Since those funds were stolen, the boutique was seized as a company asset. I am now the owner of the store she built with my money. I didn't close it, though. I kept it open, but under new management. I heard from a friend that Tiffany is now working as a greeter at a discount department store in the suburbs. She spends her days welcoming people who have more money than she does. It is a cruel fate, perhaps, but one she designed for herself with every arrogant remark she made. I walk through the halls of my home now, and I don't feel the ghosts of betrayal anymore. I replaced the furniture they chose. I repainted the walls. The house smells like old books and fresh coffee again, not Tiffany's cloying perfume. I learned that a legacy isn't about the money you leave behind. It is about the values you uphold while you are alive. My son chose the price tag. I chose the value. And that difference cost him his freedom. But it bought me my peace. The game is truly over, and for the first time in years, I am finally, truly winning. The opening ceremony of the Catherine Caldwell Center was a day I will never forget. It wasn't filled with the hollow glitz of that Ritz-Carlton party. There were no ice sculptures or fake smiles. Instead, there was warmth. I cut the ribbon, not with a pair of golden scissors, but with Catherine's old gardening shears, a symbol of nurturing growth. I remember walking through the garden of the facility, designed to look just like the one Catherine loved. An elderly woman, Mrs. Higgins, sat on a bench, soaking up the sun. She had been evicted from her apartment by a predatory landlord just weeks prior. She grabbed my hand, her grip frail but firm. "You gave me back my dignity, Mr. Caldwell," she said. That sentence was worth more than any stock dividend. It was the return on investment I had been looking for all my life. Back at the company, things have changed too. I removed the cold, sterile glass walls Preston had installed in the executive suite. The door to my office is open again. I hear the drivers laughing in the break room, a sound that had been silenced under Preston's reign of terror. I promoted the young dispatch manager, Sarah, who Preston had sidelined because she asked too many questions. She's running operations now with an efficiency that reminds me of myself at that age. Jameson and I have our own ritual now. Every Friday evening he comes over. We don't talk about law or contracts. We play chess. For years I was too busy building an empire, and he was too busy protecting it, that we forgot to just be friends. Last week, as he checkmated my king, he looked up and said, "You know, Harrison, for a man who lost his family, you seem to have found a bigger one." He was right. The staff at the center, the loyal employees at logistics, they are my family now. A family built on respect, not blood obligation. I even kept the old truck, the very first one I bought 40 years ago. Preston wanted to scrap it, said it was an eyesore. I had it restored. It sits in the lobby of the new headquarters, a reminder to everyone who walks in. We started from the bottom, and we stay grounded. That humility is what saved me when the sharks came circling. If there is one lesson I have learned from this nightmare, it is this. Loyalty is not in the blood that runs through your veins. It is in the actions you take when no one is watching. Do not assume that family will always have your back, because sometimes they are the ones holding the knife. Protect yourself, protect your legacy, and never apologize for demanding the respect you have earned. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more about justice being served, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments if you have ever had to make a tough choice to protect your own dignity. Stay strong, and I will see you in the next story.